There we go. Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone, depending on your time zone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining. Because we are going to start with a new webinar series, Mastering the Google Admin Console, and we're very happy to have you joining. This will be a 1-hour webinar, and in this webinar series, we plan to take you from beginner to advanced, and we will do that in at least 10 webinars that we have planned so far. Today, we're going to discuss the introduction, obviously. We want to start at the start in how to master the Google Admin Console. During the webinar, it would really help if you would keep your microphones muted as far as you can. There is ample of opportunity to ask your questions, however, because you can ask your questions in the chat. We have some of my colleagues in the chat available as well to answer some of your questions. And maybe there will also be moments to actually just pose your questions verbally if you prefer that. The overall planning that we have for the webinar, you can see here. We just, of course, kick off with introducing the webinar series. Then we're going to talk a little bit about ourselves, and then we're going to get right into it. At the very end will take about 10 minutes. I have planned for a Q&A, so you can ask questions about what we discussed. And maybe you will come up with certain topics that you would like to see in a next webinar that we will give. So we are organizing a 10-part webinar series, which you are now a part of. And the point of this is that these will be monthly 1-hour-long sessions, which you can follow for free. You can just register on our website. And we obviously will start at entry level today, but we will continue to expand and deepen your knowledge on the Google Admin Console on an appropriate scale. This will help you if you plan to get your Google Certified Administrator certification, because we, of course, will discuss a lot of topics that will be included in there as well. But we will make sure that we center every webinar around one specific topic and one theme to make sure that we can both bundle that knowledge, but also ensure that we can actually dive a bit deeper than you might get from just following the course. Of course, there will be room for Q&A, as I mentioned before. And what we plan also to offer you in this webinar series specifically is just our experience, really, and our best practices and some of the use cases that we have encountered to hopefully help you find solutions to some of the challenges that you may be facing if you are currently already a Google admin. So this will be a 10-part webinar, as I mentioned before. And of course, today we're going to go over the first impression of the Google Admin Console. And we will go into some basic management of users. You can see here that the 1st of April, which is not an April Fool's joke, we will get into how to manage your Google apps. 6th of May, we will go into managing Chrome. You can also see that we will go into managing Chromebooks, which obviously is one of the things that we also get a lot of requests about. And the session 5 will actually go into mobile and non-Chrome OS device management, which you can do within the Google Admin Console. Any of the topics that will be 6 up till 10 will be communicated later, including the dates for them. And that is in part also because we would very much like to take any of the feedback that you have, any of the interests that you have, into deciding which themes, which subjects would be interesting to give a webinar about. So that is the general introduction of the webinar series. Let's start off with just introducing myself. Hi, everyone. My name is Leon, and I work for the company called Cloudwise. Cloudwise has created the product Cool, and I've worked with the company for more than 5 years now. And at the company, I am a consultant and trainer. Originally, I have a technical background as an IT specialist and a project manager. But I actually grew into the role of a Google certified trainer to better help schools overcome some of their challenges in their professional development. But I am still one of the people that also is usually tasked with training new admins that essentially get bombarded with their role as IT manager and have to suddenly make sense of the Google Admin Console. Um, to introduce what we do as a company briefly is to go over a question. Cloudwise is, of course, an IT company, and we mainly only target education. Our main focus so far has been K12 education. And all that we do is really centered around one question. What if we could make IT more efficient and easy to use without the hassle and great expenses that usually are attached to them? Because when we think about IT in great many ways, IT is not a fun thing for education because it's something that is a tool, obviously. The main goal is to facilitate education and make sure that we can educate a new generation of students. And complex IT systems or systems that are unstable can really hamper the productivity in that regard. So what we tried and done in a very successful way is help schools both implement, for example, the Google Workspace environment, help them on site with their localized IT challenges. And we've done so for over 1,600 schools internationally. So we have a wide range of kinds of schools, districts, and foundations that we've helped really elevate the way that they've started using IT with education, but also really helped a lot of schools that were kind of stuck in their legacy environment to see how they could adopt working in the cloud and also managing that in a good way. Now, of course, you see the logo Cool pop up everywhere on our slide decks. That's because Cool is a product that we've made ourselves, which has integrations with Google Workspace and really helps both teachers, students, and administrators really overcome some of the challenges that we are probably also going to encounter a bit during this webinar series from time to time. Now, we as a company are still growing. When I started at the company, I was the 13th member of our staff, and now we are growing up to over 80 employees currently, and that is still growing. And we're very proud currently of our USP because we really feel that customer service is very important to us, to really think what helps you as a school, as an administrator, as a school director, a district further. How can you just take that extra step? And what can we do to get you there? So obviously, we are globally dealing with COVID-19, and with that come certain challenges. In many countries, schools have been closed by their governments. You see that it might still take months for things to really calm down and to get to a point where, well, a lot of the restrictions will be lifted. And we found that obviously education has needed to adapt to enable forms of distance learning, for example. And with that comes a lot of challenges really in how to facilitate that in a proper way if you lack the proper infrastructure to do so. Now, one of the things that really I have found helps is having a cloud-based solution like Google Workspace to make sure that at least the users can continue with their teaching and students with their education. But it also gives you as IT specialists the opportunity to do a lot of management in a simpler way than you may have done before if you were used to a more legacy environment using servers and Active Directories, for example. So that's so far the introduction on the subject. Let's dive in. So I will quickly hop over to the admin console. Now, before I actually will do that, if there are any of you that currently have joined but are at this moment not using Google Workspace for Education yet, Google Workspace for Education is free. If you can prove essentially that you're a K12 institution, you can get a free environment. I will quickly link in the chat the place where you can find information on how to do so. And I also want to express that if you hit any snags on the road, if you have trouble figuring it out, please feel free to contact us because we'd love to help you set that up. No strings attached. It's really important to us to really help you get started. If we can help you with that, we'd love to do that. So to obviously go to your Google Admin Console, we go to admin.google.com. And if you have super admin rights, you will probably see a dashboard akin to what I have in front of me. This is essentially the place where you find all the different subjects where certain rights or actions can be done within the Google Admin Console. Despite the fact that we have these tiles, you will also see that there is a main menu in the top left corner. If we click there, we have a slightly differently labeled structure. Don't worry, in essence, you can still find everything underneath the buttons as well, but it's good to know that you can find everything both in the main menu and in the tiles that you find on your dashboard here. So let's very briefly skim over the different tiles that are displayed here so that you get an idea of what's all in here. So the main tiles that we will be discussing today will be users, groups, and organizational units to really get a grip on really essentially the basics that a Google admin should know when using and managing such a Google environment. Next webinar, next month, will mainly go over the apps, and those will be some of the core apps like Gmail, Google Drive, and to show you what you can do with that. Now, obviously, within the Google environment, we make Google accounts. These accounts are an email address and have a password, and once you log into them, they provide you access to a lot of the Google services, including Gmail, your Drive, Google Classroom, Forms, and any other things that you might need. You will create them under users. In this environment, which I have built right now, is also one of our test environments, so it's pretty filled with a lot of types of users. So if I go here, by default, we will see the list build from all our organizational units. Now, organizational units are essentially the way that the entire environment is structured. What you will see is that when you have created your Google Workspace environment, you will have set a domain name, and that will be the top level organization. So in this case, it's edu.cloudwise.nl. Underneath that organization, you could create new organizations. And the whole point of that is to make sure that we can define on which level certain rights are enforced or changed, perhaps. Normally, when we would set rights on the main domain, that would mean that all those rights trickle down to every sub-organization that we create underneath it. And the way that this works is that right now in the top level, these accounts are currently in this organization. I could decide to actually move these to District A, for example. And that means that if I would have different settings for District A, then this account would then get different access or different rights, obviously. But The way you structure this is rather important, and that's the reason I want to stress this before we get into even creating accounts, because one of the things that we find um, really becomes a problem in the long run is not really thinking about how you want to structure your Google environment. To go about this, I will go back to the main screen and first go to organizational units instead. The overview here shows how the current structure is formed. So again, we have the main organization is edu.clawise.nl, and I have created two example structures on how a district might have created or set up their organization. And I will explain the differences and the benefits of those in order. These examples are based on use cases, based on our experiences with schools, with districts and foundations to see what are the best ways to set up your Google domain. So first we have District A. Now we don't put all the students and all the employees and even all the devices just in District A. No, obviously we will have additional organizations underneath it. So in this case, in the District A, we have 3 schools, and immediately after District A, we get School 1, School 2, School 3. Under School 1, we have created devices, employees, and students, so that you could put your devices under devices for School 1, employees under School 1, and students under School 1. This kind of structure helps with at least already separating certain users and devices comparative to just having a very big organization. And you specify per school which student, which employee, and what devices are in use there. Very specific settings per school can in this way be done. And the benefit of this specific structure is if you want your schools to have more autonomy, essentially, to give them more free reign in how they set up rights within their own school, instead of having top level policies that are discussed by the board or whoever's responsible at that level to be decided for the schools themselves. So again, the biggest benefit of this structure is when you don't have a overarching admin or a team of admins, but rather you probably have multiple admins that are spread around several school locations, and you will want to give them the ability to easily manage their own school. Now let's go over to District B. District B has a different philosophy because District B says we start off with the roles or the types of students or employees or devices that we have, instead of going for the schools first. Underneath the devices, rather, we see the schools. Now, the benefit of this structure will be that when you decide as a district to change one specific privacy setting, for example, and we will go over that in a later webinar, then instead of having to go to every single school, having to edit that specific policy for every location, you can do it at the device level for the district, and then it will trickle down to all the schools. However, you can still deviate from what is the default setting per school level, because you still make that distinction, but you do that after the generalization of all devices. And the same counts for the employees, and the same counts for students. And for this example, I honestly didn't bother to also go underneath every school and then create the groups essentially as organizations, or maybe the levels or the years that the students are currently in, due to that it was just a lot more work. But I think you already get the idea that by taking an approach like this and thinking ahead with how you want to structure your Google environment will save you a lot of headaches in the future. So So we have essentially two kinds of districts, and the way you then go about filling them is, well, essentially up to you. However, if I would want to create a new organizational unit, I click here on the plus icon, I give it a new name, I call this KS1, and then I can decide what the parent organization is. Now, in this case, I want this to be District B, students of School A. Create. After doing this, you will obviously see that I can now unfold this organization, and I see KS1. Under KS1, I could make another organizational unit for maybe students that have special needs, special care, need special rights, or maybe certain apps or extensions that they need access to, while that is not relevant to the other students of their age group. Now, this structure is currently not filled with users because I just wanted to build this to show you at least how we have seen and has proven to work when you want to use want to set up an organizational structure. I'll go to users and user management now, because obviously I have a lot of users here now, but just for the sake of being not really forgetting anything, I'm just going to add a new user here. You see here that I can add a new user. I can also bulk update users, download the users, and I can manage some other things. Creating a new user is pretty straightforward. If we go here, I fill in some private details. I can decide what kind of email address they get, and I can fill in some other information. So we'll go about that. Stephen, and this is Baker. And this will be Stephen at demo.cloudwise.cool. Then I decide the organizational unit. So I will go and pick that one. I will make this District B. I will go to employees, and I will go to School A. Done. The other information is not necessary. We can set a secondary email address, which is mainly useful for password recovery, so they don't have to necessarily go through you to reset their own password. Phone number can be helpful in that sense as well. And we decide here whether or not we want to automatically create a password for this new user, or that we set a password which they need to change at the next sign-in, or we say, no, the password that I set now will be their password permanently until they reset it and change it. Now, obviously, for security reasons, you really want them to set their own password just to make sure that you also yourself don't get into trouble in the future because of this. Auto-generating a password is, of course, one of the safest ways. And then I'll go to add user. When it's created, I see here that I can copy the password, so I can either send it to someone. I can immediately email the user info as well. And we have some more actions like editing this user and adding them to a group. Now, what I will do is select done. Stephen Baker, very good. I don't want to save that, thank you. And what I will do now is just search Stephen. I could also instead click here to see users from a selected organization, go to District B, go to employees, and go to School A. But in this case, I know that it's Stephen Baker, so I could also search for it in our directory. Now, we can see a few things, like the status. And the status says the account is active and it has been added recently, so it's a relatively new account. The last sign in, however, says it hasn't signed in yet, and there is 0 GB of email usage, which kind of makes sense if you've never logged in before. Now, going into managing Stephen, If I hover over, we see that I can reset his password, I can rename him, add him to groups, and a few more things underneath the button here. Personally, though, I prefer to just click on the account itself, so I get the full overview of the settings and user management that I can do. If I go through the quick list of the things that I can edit here, I can reset their passwords. Obviously, a very important thing. Of course, people forgetting their passwords is a quite common occurring theme. We can rename the user. Now, keep in mind, renaming is also what we do if you want to change the email address, their primary email address. This may take a short while for it to actually be completed if we edit this. So the update may take a bit of time, as it also states here. We can add them to a group. We can email them. Just clicking this means we are going to go to Gmail and start to compose a message. We can suspend a user. We can restore their data. We can delete a user and change their organizational unit. Let's talk about suspending users, because I find that is one of the things that also sometimes triggers some questions. Like, if I suspend a user, what then can they no longer do? What does that entail? And when do I use it? When do I not? So to go about that, I think actually deleting a user is easier to explain. If you're experienced with using Drive, Google Drive, then you know that before there were shared drives, people used to work within their own drives and shared folders and files with their team. Now, that was okay. That wasn't a fine situation until a employee left the organization, because you don't want them to longer have access to the school environment. At some point, also due to privacy ruling and policies, you may also not want to keep that account in your environment, even if it's no longer active for a long time. The downside of deleting users is that with that, every file and every folder that they have the ownership of will suddenly no longer be accessible for anyone it was initially shared with. And I express this very explicitly this way because, well, of course, this has happened in the past, which is a cause of a lot of grief. There are some things that we can do. There is no reason to panic when this happens, because we can actually restore an account when we have deleted them up till 20 days. So we do need to be kind of quick about it, but we have some wiggle room there. So what suspending does is actually making sure that an account can no longer be used to log in. So essentially, this user can no longer access any company-sensitive data and has no longer any rights to reading their email, their Google Calendar appointments, etc. All the documentation, all their files, however, are still available. So the moment that we have the same situation, we have a very core user that leaves the organization, all those files and folders still are available for the rest of the organization. Any emails, any calendar events that we send or invite this person to will automatically be rejected due to the fact that the account has been suspended. The benefit of suspension, obviously, is that if at a later time we do need to access the data of the account, or maybe the employee returns, or maybe this is not about an employee, but rather this is about a student who wants to take their schoolwork and essentially build a portfolio for their following educational journey, then it is very useful to be able to reactivate these accounts. So if I suspend the user, we see that now what the consequences are. And one of them I find very important is to take into account that if you use licenses, paid licenses, that suspended users will count to the total of used licenses. Perhaps we will go into a bit more depth about the topic of different licenses for Google Workspace and their benefits in a later webinar. But it's at least important to know that if you use those licenses on account basis, suspension does not free up this license. Deletion does do that. So I suspend the account. Then we will see that the status will change. And if we have done that, perhaps I will need to refresh before it is here, suspended by admin, then the suspend button becomes reactivate. When doing so, after that, Stephen can just happily log in again, has access to all his email and Drive documents and folders. Only downside, as it were, is the fact that in that period that the account was suspended, they have not received any emails, and any invitations to calendar events will have been automatically rejected. With deleting a user, there is an additional step which I haven't described, because when we go and delete a user, with the situation I described, we suddenly lose data. Now, let's say that we have a school director, or we maybe have a admin or another important role within your staff, and there obviously will come a replacement for this person. Then it might be very good to actually transfer the ownership of certain data to a different account to make sure that both they become and remain available to the people that were already granted access to it. So any shared files and folders, but also that any job-specific data and information will also be transferred to the new person filling in that position. In this case, I could go and say I want to take Steve Johnson, and I can now decide which data I wish to transfer. So I can say I want to transfer data from Drive and Docs, but if I also want to include all the files that are not shared, so also any private personal files that only they have access to, I have to really select that to transfer those. I can transfer all calendar events, also release all calendar resources booked in events organized by this user. Calendar resources we will also cover in a later moment in a webinar. If you had a brand account attached, so for example, for marketing purposes, or maybe for YouTube, that you had a YouTube channel, you want them to be transferred to a new owner. And Data Studio might not actually be relevant for you, but if you use it, it might be nice that you can also transfer that. Deciding not to transfer the data will mean it will get lost after the account has been permanently deleted. So I say now delete user. I have successfully deleted the user. Great. And now I'm thinking to myself, oh, that was not what I wanted. I didn't want to delete that user. So what now? Now, luckily, we can create a filter. If I go here, this is to manage the columns that we see here, but we see here a filter. And one of them is recently deleted. Now, going to recently deleted, I see Stephen here, which I just created and has 20 days left to recover. Recovering is really simple. We just click recover. We get another prompt of what this means. Do I want to put them in a particular organizational unit? In this case, I will put him back underneath District B. And then the account has been fully recovered. It can be reused. All the mail and calendar events and documents are accessible once more. Part of a security measure, I may have to re-log in once in a while, but that's all right. So that is for creating, managing one user. In the fields that we can actually set for an account, Let's see. What's this one? Is it not here yet? May take a little while. That's true. Stephen, then maybe Baker. So here we go. Oh, I'll reactivate it first. This is an important step, which I almost forget to mention. The account that I take out of a deleted state will first return as a suspended account, which we need to reactivate before it can be used to log in. We find here some statistics of this user. So we see their storage, their usage. We see some user information if you have added that to the profile. We see some security information, whether or not they use two-step authentication, apps that they have connected to their account, which Google groups they are a member of, and if they have any admin roles or privileges. And here, which apps are available from the Google services. So if we go back to users, we also have the ability to do bulk updates, meaning I can create new users, I can update current users if I want. If I want to update them and I go to bulk update users, we see that uses CSV files, comma-separated files, to make sure that we fill in the fields that we want. When we upload it, it will update all data accordingly. If you want to make use of all those personal fields, like their phone numbers, their job positions within the company, and what location specifically they are employed at, you could more easily do that with a comma-separated file than doing that manually, because obviously if you have a bigger district, it would become really hard to keep track of that in bulk. However, if you want to really manage your users in a more easy way, you will find that there are certain companies that are specialized or have worked towards making sure that you can take a separate file system, a separate information system, and use that to create and update users in your Google administrative environment, to create new users and update them automatically. We have done that with our platform Cool, for example. We have had a lot of success with that. And we've really found that it helps admins to no longer worry that much about manually constantly creating and updating those accounts. We will go into provisioning in a later webinar because we feel like there's a lot that we can talk about that if you use, for example, Active Directory and other ways to provision to the Google admin environment. So then I will go to groups. Now, groups are ways of creating mailing lists. That's one of the main usages that we've seen groups being used for, is mailing lists. You can add members to this group. Every group gets an email address. When I mail it, every member by default gets a message. But groups has had a certain position within the Google platform for a while, where it could be used for a variety of things. If you have multiple people that have to manage one email address, for example, a information inbox for your school district or your school, then creating a group for that might be a good idea. If you want to maybe create a forum discussion in a different place than maybe Google Currents or some other platform that may be familiar, groups is also a place where you could facilitate that. The complete functionality of groups is pretty complex. If there is interest in knowing how that works, by all means, let us know. To create a group, however, is not so very difficult. We have to give it a name. So I will start off with School A, District B. Call this School A, District B. to demo.outwise.cool, and I could set group owners. Group ownership is mostly important and relevant when you want to use it for something else than just a mailing list. And mailing lists can not only be used, obviously, to send targeted emails, but can also be used to just invite people to a Google document, to invite them for a Google Calendar meeting, or to, in that way, also manage them if you want to share folders or maybe shared drives. So I will go to next, and then we get access type. This is a very important page. This is an incredibly important page because this defines how the group functions on a very important level, because this has to do with access and who can do what with this group. I also find that this is actually the page where the most mistakes are being made in terms of groups, because in the basics setup, people just overlook this and say, oh, I think this is fine. And then suddenly they encounter that, for example, even though this is set to public, external email addresses can currently not send any messages to the group I just created. So how does this work? So we have contact owners, view members, view conversations, publish posts, and membership settings. So managing the members, adding them, inviting them, and approving them. We see now that the owners can do everything. We can assign managers, which is a lower level within a group, and we can say what those people may do. But we can also just add people as a member, and they can do everything in this case except for adding new people. The entire organization is allowed to do everything, and externally, they can only contact the owners. But it's about the published posts, which is rather important. If I want people from outside the organization to be able to send an email message to this group, I have to select Publish Posts. Viewing conversations is also risky, because the way that works is essentially, in this case, the entire organization is not just, of course, School A. No. The entire organization in this case would be District B, or it would actually be the top level, which means the entire umbrella of the entire Google Workspace environment. Viewing conversations means that everyone can see every message that is being sent towards this group and can read those. That might be something that you really don't want. Instead, if you say, I want to just be able to publish, they will get their messages in their own inbox instead of going to the group themselves and having being able to read every conversation that took place in there. In this case, the fact that the entire organization can see this is not something that I would want. So I will deselect this. Do you want to see who is a member of this group? That might be handy, mostly to make sure that people know when a group is no longer up to date and needs to be changed. However, my advice would be to look in ways that you can actually automate keeping your groups up to date, because that is also a thing that can really cost you a lot of time if you're not careful. The fact that group members, people who are actually a member of this group, can see and view the conversations makes a lot of sense. So this would be something that I would set up this way if I want to make sure that people from outside the organization can actually mail, in this case, every employee within School A of District B. But you see here that there are some preset settings like restricted, announcements only, and team. Where announcements only, for example, means that they actually cannot send messages themselves, but they will receive messages and can read back on every message that has been sent to this group. Also very important to note is who can join the group. In this case, it says that anyone can join the group, meaning that anyone who goes to the group's app and looks this group up, they can say, I want to join this group. And suddenly they would be immediately a member of this group. If I change this to anyone in the organization can ask, that means that the people who can manage members will be able to approve or decline their requests, making it a bit more secure because people cannot suddenly see or post message in this group when they should be restricted to other things and not being able to see that. There's also a toggle here to allow members outside your organization. Now, if I use this, the functionalities, the extra functionalities that I've mentioned before do not work. So they would not be able to use the Q&A functionality that is built into groups. They would not be able to use it as a shared inbox that way. But what you can do is, in this sense, make a mailing list to ensure that you just have one mail address to address a great number of the parents, for example, or any other external party. So I will go back to this. I will actually say that viewing conversations is not allowed. They're allowed to publish, and from externally, they're allowed to publish. And I want them to ask to join, and then I say create group. This group is currently empty. There are no actual members currently assigned to this group because I just made it. I can do that manually in this case to say I want to add members to this group from, in this case, the group overview. And I look up Stephen, and Stephen will be added to this group. I could also do it the other way around. So I go to Stephen and I add him to certain groups. Because if I would go back to Stephen now, and I will do it by just searching him in the search bar, I can see that he's now a member of one group, which is School A, District B. Going here, I could decide to actually add him to other groups as well. If I go back to the main screen of groups, we also have the option to create dynamic groups. And dynamic groups are essentially a way to make sure that, especially with larger organizations and larger districts and foundations, you can add users to groups automatically based on certain properties that have been set in their profile. So if I would try and create a dynamic group, for example, instead, I would go by conditions. So we see here a very big list of all kinds of information that could be specified and could be added to a user profile. Now, mind you, it's very important to see how you would want to set this up if you would want to use it this way at all. Again, if you want to use this method to look at, what country are they in, maybe the locations area, which building they're at, and I could add multiple conditions to make sure I get the right people for the right group. But then you will probably not do this manually by going through the entire list of every user and then adding the details by hand. Now, I can totally imagine that you probably do this either with a comma-separated file and updating it that way, or maybe you will create a PowerShell script using GAM or GAM, I don't know if you pronounce it that way in English, to use the APIs instead and to access that. But again, I find that creating groups and managing them this way can be quite a hassle if you have to keep that up over a longer period of time. Just like with the accounts, the users that can be provisioned in the same way, there are companies and there are solutions that make sure that you can automatically create groups and fill them with users. For example, if you would use the Cool portal, automatically there can be groups created based on the study groups, based on the school employees. And in that way, you already have a few groups automatically created that will also be automatically updated based on the type of synchronization that you've chosen to run. And with that, I think on the dot, I've gone through the topics that I had in mind for today. That's great. I will quickly hop on back to my presentation. and walk you through the last of the slides. So there is a lot to cover, and don't worry, we are going to give more webinars on different topics to increase and expand your knowledge on how to manage your users and an environment within the Google Admin Console. But there's more that we obviously could do for you if the necessity is there, because we can provide you with, you see it still says G Suite advice and insight, which of course is now Google Workspace. And we can give you access to the cool portal, which I mentioned a few times, if you are interested in that. Cool can solve a lot of problems, and even though you may be very new to using the Google Workspace environment, we have seen that Cool can provide a lot of beneficial solutions. Oh, I see that the slide is actually not visible. My apologies. Yes, I will have to go back here. There we go. So we can do a few things for you, like, of course, giving you more insight in how to use Google and the Workspace environment, and also how to manage that. But we can also provide you with our all-in-one learning platform, Cool. Now, Cool has many functionalities, as you can see in this diagram. I won't go over that in full detail now, but like I said, we can, for example, synchronize with your information management system to automatically provision accounts. Now, if you're interested in looking at what Cool can do, you can, of course, look at our website. But we've also created a distance learning toolkit, which may be very interesting also for your teachers. It is a web page which has a lot of materials on there, a lot of the the slide is not visible, I see. I will simply try again. There we go. Should work now. And the distance learning toolkit is essentially a Google site which will find where you will find a lot of our manuals, recorded webinars, and best practices, which probably will be of great benefit to your teachers, as essentially to make sure that we can help schools enable and facilitate their distance learning. If you want to try out Cool, if you want to do a demo, you could try it 90 days for free. And if you want to apply, we will post a link on how to apply for the distance learning toolkit in the chat at a later moment. And with that, I want to thank everyone for attending, and I think we should start a Q&A if there are any questions after this session.